TBC is back! Hooray! Time to take a break from retail and start outplaying kids with my unpruned book of abilities. I forgot to make more than 10 keybinds in this expansion. Not to worry. Skillcapped is here with the only keybinding guide you need to get off on the right foot in TBC. We huddled together with some of the best players in the world who have poured their heart and soul into optimizing keybinds over the years, and today we've broken it down so you will have the very best keybinds possible after following our step-by-step guide. So let's get started and get right into the first thing you want to get right, your movement keys. By default, your movement keys are set to WASD, and while this is fine, the issue is that A and D cause your character to turn, something labeled as keyboard turning by more established players. Now, if you're someone that keyboard turns, stop what you're doing right now and let's get those binds changed. Our recommendation is to set Q and E as your left and right strafe keys, as it will allow you to easily press numbered binds such as 1 through 5 while strafing around. However, if you're already used to using A and D as your strafing binds, that's fine, it's just a little less efficient. And in case you were wondering why it's so bad to keyboard turn, it simply comes down to how much it limits the speed in which your character can precisely turn when moving around. This is illustrated perfectly here, as we see just how awkward it is for a player attempting to move around a pillar by keyboard turning. On the flip side, once the mouse is being utilized for clean movement around the pillar, the weights are lifted and it's possible to make extremely sharp movements around it. As for the importance of being able to strafe, it's just about giving you as much freedom as possible in how you move your characters, while still being able to press other keybinds and utilize your mouse when needed. This is incredibly helpful in scenarios such as when you need to click on something like a totem while being able to move left or right. This entire concept can be taken a step further as we introduce the ability to input buffer your movement by jumping. See, when you jump, you're actually airborne for around a second and can no longer control the direction in which you move. This means by jumping in a specific direction, you rid yourself of the need to move around for a second, giving you time to press an instant ability. This becomes even more crucial if the binds you end up choosing limit your ability to use certain keystrokes together. For example, a warlock may want to strafe right with E while pressing corruption with 1 and spell lock with F at the same time. However, this simply is not possible unless they jump to their free hand. So if you ever wondered why on earth pro players are always jumping around, now you know. Before we move on, there's just one more concept you need to understand when training your movement, and that's your camera control. This is also a big part of why it's important to be able to strafe, as without binding strafe, you're forced to hold down right click in order to move left or right, which completely limits your camera control. By going into interface, camera, and changing your camera following style to never, you're able to move in one direction while rotating your camera around to look in another, which widens your field of view in important scenarios and helps you react to what enemy players are doing with their positioning while moving away from them. This is low-key a hidden OP tool that even rank 1 players still don't utilize enough to this day. So if you've been looking for some tips that can help give you the edge over your opponents, this is definitely one of them. Anyway, with that being said, let's move on to our second and most important section, keybinding abilities. The first step you want to take here is putting your spells onto your action bars. Really? Thanks, Skillcapped. You're welcome. But the trick here is to actually group up similar spells onto your action bars so you can easily see the cooldown of the abilities you want with just a quick glance. We recommend breaking them down into 6 categories: damage, healing, crowd control, offensive cooldowns, defensive cooldowns, and mobility. So let's take a mage as an example here. Damage abilities used often like Frostbolt, Cone of Cold, and Fire Blast are together for offensives. Crowd control like Frost Nova, Sheep, and Counterspell are together, and so on. Since mages have just the one mobility spell in Blink, it is grouped with crowd control as it is used often and shares a similar cooldown to some of these abilities. So with our abilities wrapped into neat little categorized packages on our action bars, it's time to start adding some keybinds. Now, many of you have heard experienced players say, "Don't copy my binds, find what works best for you." And it is mostly true. Copying the best player's exact keybinds will likely end up terribly for you, since our hands, keyboards, setups, etc. are all different to each other. But fear not, as this guide is designed for you to easily find the best keybinds that work best for you. So let's begin with step 2, keybinding your abilities. The first thing you'll need to figure out is what actually constitutes a good keybind. In order to do this, we've broken down the most easily accessible keys and ranked them for you so you can decide for yourself which binds you prefer. Now, while this ranking system does assume you're using Q, W, E, S as your movement keys, it still pretty much applies to WASD players. Starting with our S tier binds, we've got the numbered keys 1 through 4, A, D, or QE, depending on what your movement keys are, R, F, C, and mouse 4 and 5. As for our reasoning, well, it simply comes down to how quickly you can press these keys while still remaining in complete control of your character. Take the keybind R as an example. By making use of your ring, middle, and index fingers, you're able to hit R while strafing either left or right. And even for the binds that you can't press while simultaneously pressing your strafe binds, we've still placed them in our S tier because of how quickly you can utilize input buffering with jumping. The numbered key 1 is a great example of this, as it's quite difficult to strafe left while hitting 1. However, it's incredibly easy to jump left and quickly hit 1 before your jump ends. So even while your hand is anchored to your movement keys, our S tier keybinds are all incredibly fast to press and will not hinder your movement whatsoever. Our A tier continues this trend of including binds that you can press without limiting your movement, although you're now required to stretch your fingers a little further to reach tilde, 5, T, G, and V, making these binds almost as good as our S tier binds. Next, as we drop down into our B tier, we've got two binds that, although are still quite easy to press, we start to see a significant increase in time it takes to reach these binds while jumping. Consider jumping left and pressing 1. Doing so probably takes around 0.2 seconds, leaving you with ample time to get your fingers back into the position you need to have fluid control of your character's movement. However, attempting this with Z or X requires you to almost claw your hand, increasing the length of time it takes to hit these binds, making them slightly worse than our S and A tier counterparts. And last up in our C tier are a set of binds that require a much more significant stretch of the hand, making it even harder to maintain precise control of your character while using these keys. Now we've run through our tier list of the best keybinds, it's time to start allocating them to the correct abilities. One of the most common mistakes players make when assigning their best keybinds is giving them to their best abilities without considering how often they actually use their best abilities. A hyperbolic example would be binding Ice Block to number 2. Great, you get to use your best keybind once every 5 minutes. No, instead, you want to give your best binds to your most frequently used abilities. The abilities that are a part of your damage or healing rotations should get your S tier binds, followed by short cooldowns in A tier, and so on. So let's keybind some mage spells real quick to illustrate this. We give him Ice Lance on 1, Frostbolt on 2, and Sheep on 3, 4, 5, R, F, C, G, T, Y, X, Z. Just kidding. With these 3 keybinds locked in, it follows the logic of giving the most frequently used spells the best binds. Now let's add some short cooldowns on here in the A tier slots. Cone of Cold 5 and Frost Nova T. Now let's put a longer cooldown into the B tier with Icy Veins on X. With a few of these keybinds now filled out, we have a real problem. Can you tell us what it is? The answer is, Icy Veins is super awkward to press on X with the spell you're likely to use afterward, Frostbolt on 2. The key to perfecting your keybinds is to always consider, what spells do I often need to use together, and does my layout make it easy to do so? While there's no question that Icy Veins does not deserve an S tier bind due to its 3-minute cooldown, it can't be assigned to the X key without considering how it's used with other abilities. So let's think about this. Veins is essential to a mage's burst, and their damage abilities have correctly been assigned to the S and A tier keybinds. While Icy Veins is not worthy of an S or A tier bind, it's worthy of being close to our mage's most frequent abilities. So how do we solve this? We must use a comfortable modifier. Modifier keys are a special key on the keyboard that will temporarily modify the normal action of another key when pressed together. The modifiers you want to consider using are Shift, Alt, and Control, with Shift being the best of the 3 by a long shot due to its optimal position for your otherwise inactive pinky finger to utilize. When thinking about modifiers, at face value, they seem like an easy hack to get as many spells into the S tier locations as possible. While partly true, you can easily go wrong when following this logic. There are 3 rules you'll want to follow. The first is, think about spell sequences when assigning a modifier. If we think about our Icy Veins problem, X followed by 2 for Frostbolt was too clunky, so we'll assign Icy Veins to Shift 2, seamlessly simplifying our burst sequence. The second rule to follow is bittersweet, as it will wipe out most of your available modifier slots. Assign modifier binds to your focus macros for the same spells you've assigned to your normal keys too. So for our mage, he has his normal Sheep on 3. Now his focus Sheep will be Shift plus 3. Now we understand rules 1 and 2, let's put them together using a rogue to illustrate our point. Our rogue's kick is assigned to 3, so naturally focus kick is Shift plus 3. Let's say focus step was mouse button 4, but focus kick was Shift plus 3. We'd say this is trash tier. The reason why is that these spells are often used at the same time, so even if mouse button 4 was available, changing it to Shift mouse button 4 brings it to S tier due to its common spell sequence, focus step, focus kick in mind. Moving on to our third and final rule is to avoid having clutch defensive cooldowns that you need to hit in an instant assigned to a modifier. If you put your ice block on T, you're sure to hit that faster than shift plus T, right? There's a little more to this when we take rule number 1 into account though, which is spell sequences. If you played warrior and your PvP trinket was 4, and your spell reflection was shift plus 4, would you think that is a good bind? You may have said yes, but the answer is no. Pressing a normal key into a modifier key as a spell sequence, often used for scenarios where the spells often need to be pressed at the exact same moment, isn't ideal, right? However, if Shift plus 4 was the warrior's PvP trinket and Shift plus 5 is his spell reflection, that'd be A tier, as Shift can be held while pressing both spells instantly. And if they were bound to normal 4 and 5, that would be S tier, as they can be pressed instantly without holding down Shift. So as you can see, Rule 3, avoid defensive modifiers, can be ignored when considering Rule 1, spell sequencing. Alright guys, at this point you probably set on what binds you want to use, and you understand why it's important to bind your abilities in a very specific way. And while you certainly could put together an excellent set of binds with everything we've taught you so far, there's actually a few more hidden gems we're going to reveal to you now. These are binds that are not used by the masses simply because they're not super obvious, but for those that are aware of them, they unlock some excellent binds that are incredibly easy to press. Starting with our first hidden OP bind, Tab is a bind that most players exclusively use for switching their target, considering that's what the default keybinds set it to. And while it's certainly a viable way to target, especially for melee, it's much more restrictive than actually manually binding your target, which is something we'll get to in the next section. For now though, consider picking up Tab as a bind that's just as easy to press as R. Next, we've got Spacebar, and no, we're not telling you to change your jump bind or unbind jump altogether. We did, after all, spend quite a bit of time explaining why jumping is so powerful, as you can input buffer your movement. Instead, what we're suggesting is utilizing the shift and control modifiers with your spacebar to gain access to 2 of the fastest binds you can press. The reason why this is such an absurdly good keybind is that your thumb is literally resting on your spacebar at all times, and if you're not jumping, you're not doing anything with your thumb. When it comes to choosing what you bind here, avoid using abilities with no cooldown, as that will disrupt your ability to jump. Instead, stick to using longer important cooldowns like Battle Master Trinket, which is an off-global pseudo-defensive that can be used at any time to survive. And the last hidden OP keybind is actually a set of binds that almost no one realizes they can use, movement keys with modifiers. Much like with spacebar, you want to avoid placing frequent pressed abilities here, as that will hinder your movement. But longer cooldowns that you want quick access to fit perfectly into this set of binds, or spells that you have to cast and stand still for anyways. With all of your abilities now comfortably bound, all that's left to do is figure out how you can quickly and easily interact with all the different players in an arena game. The way you do this will vary depending on your role, which we'll get into soon. But for now though, let's take a look at the 2 different unit types and how you should be interacting with them. First, we've got the most obvious one, Arena 1, 2, and 3, which you'll need to interact with in 2 ways, targeting them and focusing them. Now, we don't want to spend too much time explaining the importance of the focus frame in this video, but it's just important that you understand its significance. Basically, making use of a focus frame will allow you to use abilities on a player on the enemy team that you're not targeting, which just helps make your gameplay much more fluid. For example, stunning the enemy healer while you're attacking the DPS. In total, this means you need 6 binds for changing your target and focus between Arena 1, 2, and 3. In order to set these binds, you won't be able to do them within the keybinding sections as you can in Shadowlands. Instead, you'll need to create /target arena 1 and /focus arena 1 macros and bind them directly onto your action bars. And when it comes to choose your binds for these, a very standardized approach for this is to utilize one of 2 sets of keybinds, either from your mouse or your keyboard. If we had to rank them, we definitely put the mouse wheel in our S tier for targeting, as you're able to use scroll up, down, and middle click to change your target between Arena 1, 2, and 3. Our A tier ranking places any combination of 1, 2, 3, QWE, ASD, or ZXC, either with or without modifiers to change your target or focus. You've also got the option of introducing a modifier with your mouse wheel to change your focus. However, you should only do this if that modifier is not being utilized with other keybinds to prevent yourself from accidentally changing your target or focus frame when using certain spells. And due to the restrictions you have with using a modifier on your mouse wheel to change your focus, we definitely put this one in our B tier. Now, these are, of course, all recommendations, and it is ultimately your decision what keys you choose to change your target and focus. So, whether it's your mouse wheel or any combination of 1, 2, 3, QWE, ASD, or ZXC with or without modifiers, all that matters is that you're able to quickly and easily target or change your focus to whoever you need to in a fraction of a second. As for the second unit type, we've got your team, which is Party 1, Party 2, and Player. Now, we absolutely recommend that healers have a comfortable bind for being able to quickly target both members of their team as well as themselves, all of which can be done via the keybinding menu. DPS, on the other hand, that have abilities they can use on their team, such as a mage using decurse, generally benefit more from having macros that can be used directly on specific members of their team. So if you're a healer, you might want to consider using our S tier tool for targeting yourself and your teammates by putting target party 1 and 2 on mouse wheel up and down, and then using middle click to target yourself. Alternatively, an A tier approach is to utilize your side mouse buttons, so mouse 4 and 5, to target party 1 and party 2. This way you can keep target arena 1, 2, and 3 on your mouse wheel. The only caveat is that you'll need an additional comfortable bind for targeting yourself. Alright guys, that just about does it for this, the only keybinding guide you need for TBC. If you haven't already, be sure to give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to be notified the moment we release all of our upcoming TBC content. From tier lists to class guides and some insights into just how ridiculous and fun TBC Arena can be, Skill Capped is the place to be. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.